Gutoy, gutoy. Now, how many of you in this room understood what I just said? According to the most recent census data, 97% of Oklahoma would not have understood me. This means help me in Vietnamese. Now, before I get into why this is so important to all of us, I want to share with you why it's important to me. My father, he escaped Vietnam in 1980 at just 18 aboard a small boat with 43 passengers with the Philippines as the destination in mind. After just a few days at sea, they ran out of fuel and were left with no choice. They had to rip the engine out of the boat and throw it into the ocean. The lighter the boat, the faster they could sail to their destination. They sailed the ocean for 3 weeks, but they never made it to the Philippines. You see, a typhoon had come in and swept their boat right into an island belonging to China. Now, luckily, this was a military island. The passengers were taken to a bunker and sheltered. My father, now a refugee, was sponsored by Catholic Charities to travel to the United States, but he spoke no English. Now, Catholic Charities is an organization that offers resettlement services to refugees who fled their homeland during the war. My mom, her story was a little bit different. Her mom, my grandma, arrived to the United States by plane. She left in 1975, leaving my mom and uncle behind. And it wasn't until 10 years later that my mom and uncle were able to obtain their sponsorship through Catholic Charities and reunite with my grandma. By the 1980s, Catholic Charities had resettled nearly 7,000 Vietnamese families into Oklahoma. This refugee community created what we know today as the Asian District. My mom, she never graduated high school, but she knew enough English through her ESL class to make it by. Her first job in America was at a tailor's. My dad's was folding newspapers. Both of these occupations requiring little to no communication in English to complete the task at hand. Now, they eventually marry. My mom moves to California where my dad's living. She stops working, becomes a stay-at-home mom. But they didn't make enough to get by. With 2 babies at home, my mom had to go back to work. And unfortunately, this just wasn't sustainable. And I can relate because I'm a new mom. When my parents packed up, they moved back to Oklahoma, where the cost of living was cheaper and accessing opportunity was said to be easier. When my mom arrived back to Oklahoma, she noticed that the Vietnamese community was even larger than when she left. But she also noticed that they still had no form of entertainment. And she knew this because she was one of them. Now, this is the 90s. There's no streaming, there's no Vietnamese music on the radio, and there's definitely no TV channels in Vietnamese. So she opened up her version of a Vietnamese blockbuster, selling CDs and Chinese movies on VHS that were translated into Vietnamese. Customers came in on a weekly basis to pick up new movies. It was something that they looked forward to. Now, my mom's store became even a greater community staple when she started offering money transferring services. Now, this is best described as like a Vietnamese Western Union. With the majority of the community still only speaking Vietnamese, this allowed them to fill out a form and send money back home to their families in confidence. The store is still open today, although it's moved a few times in 30 years, but it's still located in the heart of the Asian District. Now, my parents worked very hard to fulfill their version of the American dream. A nice house in the suburbs, in a good school district. When my brother and I were too young to stay at home alone, we would go with my dad to the video store so he could help my mom. Now, because they spoke Vietnamese to us in the home, and it was all that we heard on the weekends, we grew up bilingual-ish. And so, my brother and I, we could hear and listen to all of the Vietnamese, and we could speak a little bit in conversation, but not without a little bit of English sprinkled in. And I guess if they call English and Spanish Spanglish, then this would be called Vietlish. In 2007, my parents opened up a restaurant, Lee's Sandwiches. Now, this is my sophomore year, and I'm not gonna lie, I resented them for working so much. I really couldn't wrap my head around why they would want to open up a restaurant when they already worked so much already at the video store. My peers, their parents got to be home with them on the weekends, hosting family dinners, sleepovers. I didn't really get that. Their absence in my teenage years made me vow to myself that I would never, ever, ever work in a restaurant. I want to be with my family. But ha ha ha. Joke's on me. You guys know where to find me. So my parents first asked me to come help at the restaurant 7 years ago. I really dreaded it. I was living this big, glamorous life in Dallas. I didn't want to come home and be the cashier at my parents' Vietnamese sandwich shop. But turns out this was the best decision I have ever made. It was my doorway to community. It gave me a lens to see why they worked so hard every day. It wasn't just because we had staff that depended on us to be open so they could provide for their families, but it was for the community. Hundreds of people walk through that door each day, and each and every interaction can make an impact. One day, one of my customers grabbed my attention while I was working at the sandwich line. She says, "Jenny, one of your customers just fainted. An ambulance is on the way. How is your Vietnamese? Can you ask him if he's okay?" I rush out to the dining room to see who it is. It's one of my regulars. I don't know his name, I just call him back. And in Vietnamese, this is an informal name for like an older uncle figure. Now, Back comes in every day for his $1.50 black coffee, and I know enough Vietnamese to ask him how he's doing. That interaction is usually like 2 minutes a day, tops. But today, I had to ask him how he was feeling. He told me that his heart rate had spiked. He had a watch on that monitored it, and he kept rattling off the numbers to me in Vietnamese as they would change. Now, when the paramedics arrived, they started drilling me immediately with questions to translate. Is he having any chest pains? Has he had any previous heart issues? How old is he? Does he have any family to call? Back is 96, and he had a previous heart surgery in the 90s. We were able to call his daughter and let her know which hospital he was headed to. Now, this really shook me. Why isn't it normal practice for an emergency response team coming to this area, the Asian district, to have a plan ready for someone who doesn't speak English? So let's think about this deeper. What happens when one of our immigrant neighbors who doesn't speak any English, maybe they're home alone, and they call 911? How do they ask for help? So I got curious. I called the non-emergency Oklahoma City police line, and I asked them these questions. A very sweet and kind lady answers the phone, and I give her my made-up scenario. Hey, my grandpa just moved here, and he doesn't speak any English. How would you help him if he doesn't know how to ask for help? And she says, well, we would ask him what language he speaks. And I said, well, what if he doesn't understand you? And she says, well, we'll try to get him to tell us. And I said, okay. And she said, we do offer a third-party service called the Language Line with live interpreters. And I was like, okay, but how does he ask for that interpreter? And so this isn't a perfect science, but at least they had some sort of plan. But what if we could do this better? What if, when calling 911, you were able to dial an extension, right? So the top 3 immigrant populations that are in Oklahoma today come from Mexico, Vietnam, and India. Now, what if we dialed 911 and then we could dial 63 for Mexico, 86 for Vietnam, 46 for India? I don't know if anybody's working on this right now, but we certainly know that it's possible. And it can't happen overnight, but it's possible. So we know that communication is not only important during an emergency, but communication is necessary during times when there's not an emergency. One day, one of my Spanish-speaking staff members asked me to set an appointment for him to see a hand specialist for an injury he had. Now, although the paperwork says, "Se habla español," you had to get through a phone tree in English to get to somebody that would help you. Now, he couldn't navigate that. So we set the appointment for him, and he waited weeks for the appointment. When he gets to the doctor's office, they tell him that there's no interpreter available and they wouldn't be able to proceed with the appointment. He left that office feeling defeated, with no answers and no new appointment time. Now, why, if nobody could be there, why couldn't they have called somebody? Why couldn't they just use their phone and an app and at least tried to translate something. Now, it wouldn't be perfect, but at least it's something. With 250,000 immigrants in Oklahoma and 45 million immigrants in total in the United States, situations like these happen all around us all of the time. So what can we do? What can we do today when we leave this room to ensure that our neighbors have equal access to help and opportunity? We can do 3 things. Number 1, we can be resourceful. We can leverage tools like Google Translate to facilitate communications in person. Now, I know a lot of us, when we need to translate something, we just go straight to google.com and we translate what we need. But I highly encourage you to download the app and just keep it there. Using the app, you can use their conversation feature and facilitate a conversation almost real time. And not only that, you can use their camera feature where you can take a picture of a document, a sign, anything with text, and it'll be translated into the language that you need. Let's educate our friends, family, and community members about these tools. If you own a business, run an organization, consider how you would offer your services to someone who doesn't speak your language. Number 2, let's be courageous and be willing to help. It could be as small as helping somebody use the self-checkout at a grocery store, even as big as helping during a medical emergency. Every interaction can make an impact, and you don't know how much that moment might mean to somebody. And last but not least, let's be patient and let's be kind. Contrary to popular belief, saying something louder does not make somebody understand you better. and neither does being frustrated. So let's be patient. And my rule of thumb is, if you can't translate it, demonstrate it. Nonverbal communication, body language is universal and can often bridge the gap. So I know that everyone in this room has 2 things. You have a cell phone and you have a heart. Now with these 2 things, we can bridge community by more effective communication. Because we know that the power of words creates competency, which equals accessibility, which equals opportunity. We all have the power to be an interpreter. We can all make a difference. Thank you.